Hi, everybody. Welcome to Domain Sherpa. Exciting stuff today as we're debuting a brand new show called Off the Market Forever. This show features none other than James Iles and Chris Zuiker as we focus on the domain space through the lens of end user acquisitions and upgrades. For those of you who don't know, James is one of the best writers in the space, doing insightful interviews with founders about key domain additions and writing other domain related stories on the Media Options blog, as well as other platforms and publications, including his own site, jamesnames.com. Chris, on the other hand, is one of the best and most successful domain brokers in the world and is responsible for assisting with more purchases by and sales to end users than almost anybody else in the industry. Pairing these two guys together is really special as it brings some unique insight and experience to the table that you just don't get elsewhere. This is why we're so excited to have this happening right here on Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. And on today's show, we talk about a bunch of domains such as Electra.com, Wealth.com, Firework.com, and RocketReach.com. And as usual, big shout out to Dan.com, the number one place in the world to buy and sell your domains with a special platform made for domain investors. With all that, it's time to get into this episode of Off the Market Forever, because once it's gone, it's gone. What's up, Sherpa Network? Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Jonathan Tenenbaum, a.k.a. JT, a.k.a. Jay On, and I am the host and producer of Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. Today's show is a new show that I'm so excited about. We've been talking about this for a while. It is called, drum roll please, Off the Market Forever.
Okay.
Off the Market Forever. And it's featuring two good friends of mine who are involved in our business, in the Media Options Domain X business, which is James Iles and Chris Zuiker. And I'm going to go ahead and give you guys who don't know, although I think for a lot of you folks, this is a domain-focused show. I think for anybody who's been in and around the domain space at all over the last however many years knows who these guys are, but it is my sort of privilege and pleasure to be up here with them today. So I'm going to go ahead and give them a little bit of a full-on intro. So I'll start below me with Mr. James Iles, a.k.a. James Names, a.k.a. James Isle of Man, a.k.a. Walter Cronkite. So for those of you who don't know, James is one of the leading writers, journalists in the domain space. He's got his jamesnames.com blog. Definitely check that out. It's a domain-centric blog published by him. Prior to founding that, he was the lead writer for the Name Pros blog, published over 700 articles. And that was between 2015, 2019. Keep me honest here, James, if I'm off on any of the details.
No, all good.
Since then, you've been building the James Names property out, you've been referenced in major news outlets, Mashable, Business Insider, Vice, and then also working with some of the best and brightest in the domain industry, including us at Media Options. So, interest of full disclosure, James does write for us, and which is awesome. It helps us with putting out a ton of really, really great content. He also DN Academy, Domain Name Wire. Shout out to Andrew Alleman. Shout out to, I would say Michael Seiger, but now GoDaddy, right? And DND.com, while working on a bunch of other different projects and other good stuff. And so now that he is part of our team and our camp, we're looking to do this show as part of the Domain Sherpa Network once a month, Off the Market Forever. What's happening, man? How are you, James? What's going on?
Yeah, all good, all good. How you doing, JT?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. So keeping it moving, I got one more. My guy, Chris Zuiker, a.k.a. Zuiker's Island, a.k.a. The Plug.
Zuiker's Island, I like that.
A.k.a. Joe Girard. You know who Joe Girard is, by the way?
Oh.
He is literally the Guinness World Book of Records, the greatest salesman in the history. He was sold like 13,000 cars working for Chrysler from like the 70s through the 80s. So, and for those of you who don't know, Chris is literally the number one sales guy in the domain industry. He's been working with Media Options and Andrew for years, and for myself for a few years now too. And he is the guy that makes the engine go. I think, prior to working with Media Options, he was a sales and marketing exec, managing accounts, $100 million in annual sales revenue, I believe.
$100 million down.
If you're into something,
that's a couple million,
So, and, but since Chris has come on board, Drew has really given him the keys and, and he's really, taken over and really helped grow Media Options into what it is today, under Drew's guidance and tutelage. Nobody in this space talks to more decision makers when it comes to domain names for end user use of domain names on both the buy side and the sell side than Chris. I mean, he is that guy. And has, responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in domain sales, and servicing companies that literally make up the top. I mean, if Fortune 100, Fortune 500, Fortune 10, Fortune 5, I mean, literally
Fortune 1 million. No, it's interesting because you say that it's like one of my lines I use, not a line I use, but, in talking to people, it's like, I talk to the best marketers in the world, and the worst marketers, and it's like, okay, what am I, right? As you're talking to them. We talk to billionaires, we talk to millionaires, we talk to, thousandaires.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the great thing about
gamut.
Well, and that's a great thing about our business. And largely, when it comes to what Chris does, and this is really the focus too of what this show is going to be about. So like I said, we're looking to run this show once a month. This is really going to be Chris and James's show. Because Chris deals with, and when we talk about off the market forever, Drew uses that all the time on social media. When we talk about the idea of super premium domain names or just premium domain names in general, our goal is really to try to get those in the hands of their best case end user, right? And which is more often than not, it's really the company, the brand that like really what it means is that they are the best sort of entity, company, what have you, to utilize that particular domain name. And for certain domains, there might be a handful of folks that would qualify depending on the name and the brand and all that kind of stuff. But, ultimately, we work on behalf of folks that are both selling domains to make sure that they, get the right value for those names, especially as the value of domains and digital assets continue to climb, even in this bear market. I mean, domains are still as valuable as ever. And, and then on the flip side, we also help companies all the time in their acquisition of domains to help them get their best case domain name, because, we really do believe that for, the continual evolution of the internet, really the key is in order to get these domains in the right hands. And that ends up benefiting folks on both the buy side, the sell side. And, and we are the best in the world at that. We've been recognized by escrow.com. Drew has been sort of recognized by name in the Escrow Best Broker Awards, but really it's Drew, Chris. I mean, Drew and Chris probably could be spots 1 and 2 respectively for the past 3 years themselves. So, and we don't take that responsibility lightly. We don't say that lightly either. We're not just, yes, we're bragging, I guess, but it's hard work that allows us to say that in the first place. And anyway, so this show really, and with James, he's writing articles about these exact situations where, folks that are upgrading their domain names, where they are getting the key, the number one option.com, acquiring big time super premium domains, seeing immediate value in doing so. And, and some of that activity that happens in the domain space. So, since it's like really the perfect tandem with you guys, that's why I'm excited to kick this thing off and ultimately hand this over to you guys, either, next episode after. I probably won't even be on here. And we'll also look to be able to bring on some folks that can talk about, these end users that have acquired these kinds of names and, the thought process and the benefit and the value. And, so and it all falls under that umbrella and the mantra of off the market forever, because it's like, once that name is gone, it is
it's gone. It's not coming back. It's interesting because we have so many stories. And there's one domain we bought in the low 7 figures, and we had an offer like almost in the 8 figures. And you think, okay, that's pretty enticing, right? But the company that bought it's like, no, we're not selling it. That's part of our brand.
Yeah.
We've seen that in the 100,000, 200,000. We've seen that in the 30,000 to the, let's say, the 100,000. And when a company buys it and it's integrated in the brand, it immediately becomes, part of their brand equity, and it's priceless, and they're just not going to sell it. But I guess building on what you're saying, James, you and I, man, we've been wanting to do this for a while, kicking it around. I think it was like a year and a half ago. And
yeah, I was just going to say about a year ago.
Yeah. Life just takes over. But, it's really one of the, off the market forever is the title. And, when I came into this domain space, one of the first things I started to go down was like, why do people buy? Right. I really wanted to understand that, there was like 2 tracks I could go down. I could go down the investor side of the business to understand like wholesale domain names and but on that side, but what really intrigued me just from my background was like the end user side. Like, okay, why do brands, like, why do they buy? What are their strategy? Why do they pay what they pay? Like, what's this natural evolution to a brand and a domain name, and how does it come into it? I've developed a lot of frames since then. Frame just way to talk about domain names. One of those was the 7 dimensions. When I first came in, this is like 6 years ago. I think it was 6 years ago, maybe 7, maybe 5. I don't know.
Time flies when you're having fun, though.
I don't know. Yeah, no, I mean, we enjoy what we do. It's the best. I tell you, it's the best job in the world. I'd love it. But people
you kind of have to say that one here anyway, don't you?
I mean, truly, I couldn't be. I mean, I wake up energized because we really talk to the coolest people in the world. But everything was centered upon real estate. It was like, hey, domains are like real estate, and then it was like this data, and it was all this stuff that would put you to sleep if you heard it, right? If you're trying to sell domain name and you're like, you don't understand, like, this is property on Broadway, they're like, we don't care. Like, we're like one, block off of Broadway. We got tons of business, It didn't have that same emotional appeal to domains, right? And so I had to develop, I developed the 7 dimensions to how a domain name impacts a brand. That's I talk about that a lot. I've got over 900 podcasts. Go to chriszuiker.com, check that out. Over 100 videos on my YouTube channel, and lots of blogs. But you talk about the 7 dimensions, like how does a domain impact a brand? But really, James is excited to do this and this, today, really just kind of kicking it off, get it going, getting it moving. I think we're gonna develop a good cadence once we get going, because my vision for this show is just to look at, twofold, right? It's like why companies buy, with real examples from your blogs, which are great. And then from the flip side of that is kind of try to look at companies that other companies, I think we might use NameBio, and that bought a domain name. And, just once again, like, why did they buy? What's the price? And I think this gives incentives to the end user. Okay. These brands that are looking and trying to justify, okay, why, like, can we justify this domain? Gives that social proof.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Chris. I think that brings up a really interesting point too, and we'll get into the weeds on some of these specific deals, things that we can talk about specifically, and because I do think, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, one of the largest hurdles that you're going to get when you're dealing with, like, especially when you're working on the acquisition side, is for folks who need a particular domain, but how do you give them the proper context of the value of those domains, right? And each domain's a snowflake. I say, we say that all the time, right? And some are more easily obtainable than others. But I think as the digital, sort of as the internet has evolved, and digital assets in general, and I think, folks that own premium domains, understand that they're valuable, right? No one owns a oneword.com anymore that doesn't at least have some sense, if nothing else, just based on the fact that their emails get pinged with offers all the time, right? That just come in unsolicited, offering them some amount of money for their domain name. So at least that gives them some anchoring around what their domain is worth. So, people are not selling these for $1,000, right? So, I'd be interested to kind of hear, how do you try to establish that sort of baseline for folks to understand what it is going to cost them to get the name that they need?
Right. So that's the first step, right? It's like, so my view on selling is worldview, self-view, roadmap, right? So worldview, when you talk to someone, is like, the first thing to say is, domains aren't important. We don't need it. You're like, you're 100% unequivocally wrong. Domain names, and Drew does a great job of this. It's like, no, you're an idiot, but I love you. You're an idiot, and like, you're like, what's going on here? This pull push, but like, you need the worldview needs to be broken. Like, what, if the worldviews align, you'd buy the product, right? I mean, if your worldview is aligned with has to do with any product that you're trying to sell or buy, worldview is the first one. Like, I need this, right? It's important. Domain names are important. The 7 dimensions are important, right? So that's that way of looking at this. And then from there you go to self-view. And that's this, once again, James, this is very good, because self-view is like, well, can I do it? So we talk to people and they know intuitively, it's like, yeah, I need this domain. I know it, but I don't know if I can use it, right? Now, they don't say that directly. I mean, kind of they do, but it's like, do they believe that they can build it, right? Are they at that point where they believe that they're all in on this brand and nothing's going to stand in their way? And I think, James, it'd be interesting as we go through your, and I haven't officially done this, but I bet you some of the responses are like that. Like, it's like, hey, we just knew that we're at that point where we needed this, right? we needed to grow. We
Yeah.
needed to scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the Media Options website, there's a whole ton of on the record interviews where
Yeah.
I chat to end users, and so many of them really get to a point where they think, just to expand to that next level, we need that domain.
Yeah.
And I think
So
by the time
worldview
this
is
comes
like
out,
domains are important. The ROI, JT, right? Self-view is like, we need this, we can do this. It's that social proof that you get. And then roadmap is, can you make it easy to buy? I mean, you'd be surprised. Like, you got buyers out there like, I want it, we need it. And then they're like, how do we buy it? And then like, the buyer is like, I don't know, like dark somewhere. And,
You mean the seller? Yeah. No, I mean, well, and
there's
that's
no
the thing.
roadmap, baby, So,
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, and that's where, not to make this a big, this isn't all just trying to promote what we do and how we do it, but, I mean, because there are a lot of other folks that do the same thing as far as, but identifying, who and the right relationships with the right people, and, just to be able to get access and to be able to, to do the reconnaissance necessary to find out who and what. And because it's also not just about, hey, we need to make contact at this company. It's like, you need to make sure that you're contacting the right people. And, those types, that Rolodex takes a long time to develop properly, especially across this space. And, and just to know how to, flip over which rocks and all that good stuff. And then, because it's also it'd be interesting to talk about too, the idea of because you have these upgrades, right? Because that's another part of the blog series that we're doing on MediaOptions.com, which we're highlighting, where folks upgrade their domain from like the .co or to a .com versus they're a company that has a product, an app, and they've gotten funded, or now we're and looking to go and they're honing in on what their brand is going to be, but their brand doesn't fully exist yet, and so when we talk about like upgrades, and we've got a couple of examples, right? James, what are some of the ones that you've come across recently that are notable, or at least let's kind of dive
but
into
you
one.
you want to just hit his you want to just go through some of his things right now, JT? Just, 'cause he has those three.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll just make one more point though. So we hit James's stuff, and then the second half to this is to look at like JT, exactly what you just said is like, to me, your domain equals your brand equity. And the story of a domain sale is the story of the evolution of a company.
Yeah.
It truly is. It's the story of a company growing up. A lot of times they come up very quickly, but I think that can help investors out, because if you don't understand this, you're going to walk away. You're going to pass them the best offer.
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right, and that's something too where I think it's also important. And I know you bang this drum all the time. It is. Our goal is to get it into the hands of the best case end user, right? But timing matters, right? And there are times where that best case end user could exist at one point in time, and if you can't get a deal done, then or you have a seller who's stubborn, they're going to hold out. And it's one thing to say, okay, the difference between a 10x kind of multiple is one thing, but we've seen plenty of deals fall apart where then the buyer decides, hey, we're going to go with a different, we're going to shift to a different brand altogether. So I think it's interesting, or they do a rebrand, and which and then so it's like you have to be able to create kind of the right balance between benefit to making sure sellers get what they want to get for the domain, and making sure the buyers can pay what they need to pay, but also that they get the domain. Because it's like, if you can't marry the two things together in this really funky kind of interesting ecosystem, then that doesn't fit, and then it falls apart. And then you've got people who've passed on huge sums of money thinking like, oh well, this is going to happen, that's going to, especially when you're dealing with, again, particular companies that are moving through a certain part of their life cycle, or if you're dealing with domains that are in a certain, like a certain vertical, right? Like we're seeing it now where, a lot of the
meta domains is great,
Yeah, well, like that whole thing has cooled off a ton, right? I mean, and we expected it was going to, because it exploded and it blew up so fast.
Right.
And it's all great, everyone's selling their, meta domains for all this money and this and that and every extension and things. And then it's like, but then, we run into a bear market, and, then, a lot of the flashy things, become, less, important, and, people pivot to other stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, you had domains that you were getting huge offers, you were turning them down because you thought, no, they're just going to keep going up. and now those opportunities are gone, and they may never come back. So it's like you're trying to educate and
Yeah.
work that balance on
Yeah.
both sides. It's an interesting, it's an interesting balance and dynamic that you got to deal with on every deal.
Yep.
So yeah.
Boom, there you go. That's what this is going to be about off the market.
Because once it's
gonna-
off the market forever,
Going
it's
to
off
take
the
it
market.
all.
Yeah.
It's going to be some good stuff. So
Yeah.
I think we hit over to James. Want to hit one of your articles and kind of go through it? And,
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's worth also saying though that this is both for end users and investors. I think there's a lot of tips and tricks that investors can pick up through this series about. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, 100% about what this matters and why it's beneficial to, our audience, which is a combination of end user folks and folks that are, just, have other businesses that are not domain businesses, a lot of tech folks, you know what I mean? And, VCs and PE folks too, as well, that kind of make up our audience, because that's a big chunk of who we do a lot of business with. But the domain investors as well, because as they're going and selecting names and then figuring out how to best, work through the process of getting the names in front of the right people to be able to get those deals done, to extract the most value, because a lot of times that is also the case. I mean, the people who are the best use case for the domain are likely the folks that is going to be the most valuable for, right? So they're going to be the ones that are going to be willing to cut that check. Could really, make a real difference for somebody's bottom line. But that's also why it's important that when you have that opportunity and you've got that dialogue and it's there and you've got the chance to get something done, don't take a bird in the hand and just, and let it fly away. Right. So I think that's where, and for us, it's like when we look at our DomainSherpa audience, I mean, this is a perfect show to expand some of what we've done with the network. We do our rabbit hole shows, which, kind of dive into some of the things like the NFTs and the Web3 stuff, because, we've got digital assets, as a broad, market that, covers not just domain names. So, and as those things continue to evolve and do pretty cool, interesting things, it's, we want and we're into that as well. We want people to, sort of be able to get some of that insight as well. And, but this show is, I think, perfectly suited for, the DomainSherpa audience, especially the domain maxis. This is literally, this is insight that you're just not going to get, otherwise. And so I'm just excited to be a part of it and happy to be able to bring this to everybody. So with that said, man, with that is kind of one of my things, Zuiker will tell me, he's like, man, if you took a shot every time JT says with that on DomainSherpa, you'd be crawling home. Let's start with one of the more recent articles and let's talk about it. Let's dig in.
So the first one that I want to get to is on my blog, jamesnames.com. And it's a post that I wrote today as of recording. Mm-hmm. And it's about Electra.com, Electra.com.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and so obviously it's a fantastic name, and that's what's also great about this is we'll really get to focus on a lot of really cool super type premium domain names that are so unique and and really some of the best of the best. So Electra.com, it was previously owned by Universal, right? Is that the
so before that it was owned by General Electric. Not sure why it changed to Universal Studios, but it changed hands.
Well, no, because of probably Electra, the comic book character, so because Universal, they had the deal with Marvel Studios and, to do, that's why if you go to Universal Studios, like the theme parks, you've got the Spider-Man rides and, Dr. Doom's Fearfall. I take my kids to the theme parks, obviously. Actually, shout out to Andrew Miller, because I think this was if this wasn't one of his, I know he helped Universal.com he helped Universal acquire Universal.com in that deal with James Booth. And we actually did a DomainSherpa where I recorded the show live from Universal Studios Orlando. Played all into it, and we got to do the parks for a couple of days. But anyway, but
I can expense this out, baby. This is awesome.
I think Drew was like, "Nah, dog." He was like, "Nah."
It's a marketing meeting.
I'm like, "Come on, man." I'm like, he's like, "Wait, churros inside Universal the park, don't qualify." But what was I saying? But real quick. Yeah, Electra is one of the comic book part of the Daredevil Marvel universe, and so that was Universal's deal before Disney bought Marvel. So, which also probably explains why they were willing to get rid of it after a certain period of time, because then they no longer had the need. They no longer were the best use case, sort of end user for the domain. So, who bought it? Do we know like what details around that?
So there aren't a huge amount of details out there about who bought it. What I do know is that the company that did buy it acquired Electra.co in April 2022 for $50,000. So yeah, this is a very quick upgrade for them, really quick.
Yeah,
Well,
that's awesome.
And it's interesting because I mean that's what we see. I mean, like, okay, there's not James. I think your articles on media options might have a little bit more insight, right? Because the owner, I was actually just in the interim here reading the wealth.com one. Maybe we hit that one when we're done, because I think there's a couple of good points. In this one, there's not much. We don't, we know that they upgraded from like, let's go. I'm just looking at it here. They upgraded from, help me out here, James. What were they before that? They were
Well, they had
go-electra.com.
Yeah, Electra.co to Electra.com.
Yeah, yeah. So go to, okay. Okay, that's actually a different company. Okay, which is kind of the point, right? So I mean, they went through this upgrade where they and that's what we see a lot of times. Companies, they come to say, hey, Chris, let's look at this one, but let's also look at these other variations, right? I mean, in my mind, a company, from a company standpoint, you need to own all the variations you can, right? The .co, the .ai, the XYZ, because you want to own the global positioning. You don't want another company out there, another brand, or there's forbidden trademark classes, right? You don't want them to own that. And so it's smart for them to, not hit the .co, then hit the .com, and to try to get as many as possible. Now, from an investor standpoint, I think Drew's talked about this, and other people talked about it, like, you're kind of better off selling some of them, right? Letting the .xyz go, the .io, if you have the portfolio, that way you allow the ecosystem to build, and then, to come after the
Yeah, that's
.com.
a really great point too. If you've got a handful of them, right? Like, let's say you're somebody who has Electra and a bunch of the different TLDs, saying like, and you don't have your .com buyer right away, which is obviously your big buyer, but you can sell the XYZ, right? It's like, then and it's to a company that has some real potential. Maybe they're possibly going to get funded, or they're somewhere in their, sort of in their funding phase somewhere in their life cycle. And, that's a really great point. You're planting the seed, to where it's like, and then if they're successful on that domain, then it's like, they're naturally going to come back to you for the .com if you have it. Right. And I think that's really a really kind of cool, interesting point. Because, oh, go ahead.
Well, or it's the other way around, right? So let's say they take the .com down. Now, other companies, I mean, there's stories, right? I mean, we were looking at name bio, like, Lucky.io, right? I mean, there's all these other ancillary brands that are out there, Mint.io, right? That other companies then can say, I like that word. I'm not going to get that, but what else can I get, right? So it's almost like, it's for investors, it's this dual edge. The .com then creates credibility and win behind that. And then people are like, oh, that's cool, and then, knowing they're never going to own the goal positioning, right? They're never going to be the alpha, but they're okay with being the beta, right? They get these other ones. And
I think they're putting having the .com off the market forever has the ability to make the other TLDs more valuable, because if they can brand around like a .io or a .xyz and just be that bit different, I think that it can create some value for a domain investor that holds that. They can probably ask a higher price, especially if it's if it's a really popular keyword, for example.
Yep, I would agree.
I agree with yes. I mean, it also makes it more valuable. But in my negotiations, I've never seen it where, like, you have the .net.org, and they're like, yeah, let me pay you X% more for these other domains. I mean, it's usually they want one, they go in, they get that one. So, in this case with the Electris, like, I can see that. I mean, when you look at LinkedIn, there's several different companies with that brand in it. So, I mean, it's a popular brand. And, for them to take it down, I think was pretty important to take, both those down. I'm not a big fan of the .co.
No, but I think there, and this is probably something where if we could get additional insight, it'd be great. But maybe we will as it gets a little clearer as to who's who and what's what with it. But yeah, I mean, look, if the idea was, and I would agree, I'm not a huge .co fan. It's too close to, I feel like I actually like .io better than .co, because there's enough variation there where at least it's not. Co is too close to com, and because of that, I think it's like if you're operating your business on a .co and there's somebody else who has the .com, just think about the amount of email leakage and just the amount
Huge,
of like
huge, yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
Massive.
you have to and we see it all the time. I mean, Drew talks about it. We see it with a lot of the domains that we own. So with certain big names we have, we get, crazy emails from all the sub TLDs, and Rick Schwartz talks about this all the time, And so, com is definitely king, but I do think that, we've seen some extensions, especially in some spaces like Web3, where there's been so much activity so quickly, where you've seen companies have some success, using like a .io, a .xyz, a .ai perhaps. And I think those are at least different enough from the .com. I think .co has too much overlap. We actually don't really, even on Sherpa, we rarely talk about .cos. But I do think it was key for them to grab it if the plan was always to get the .com, kind of to Chris's point. It's like, then that way you don't have somebody else that's kind of biting at your ankles,
Well,
with your
James, what were they?
friend.
What were they before that again?
Do we know what they were before?
I'd say I think it might be a new company.
Okay.
I can't find anything else beyond.
Okay, yeah, because I couldn't
So
find
I'm
it.
thinking
On,
it's a new company.
Yeah,
so
so
I'm
you know-
wondering whether.
Yeah, so we'll move on to another one, but putting a pin in this one, it'll be interesting. And like I said, do we know if, because this was part of that Universal portfolio, do we know if Miller was he involved in this deal? Was that something?
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was Miller and Loomis.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
this one.
yeah. So we've got, Miller will be on Sherpa, like our Sherpa review in a week. Maybe we can hassle him a little bit, see how much he can disclose by way of like the company. But if nothing else, this would be the kind of thing where as this show evolves too, like, we'll track some of these, as we see these things happen without seeing who the company is. And then once the name starts getting put to use, it's like we'll have an opportunity to, to talk about it more. Also, too, for deals that we do, we'll have the ability to, to the extent we can share. I mean, we can't share a whole lot of info, but, we can get some of these founders on the show as well to talk about, the thought process and answer some of these questions from that standpoint, which I think will be super helpful for, the domain sellers and the domain investors to get inside the heads of the folks that they're ultimately trying to. These are literally the unicorns, the white elephants, or whatever you call them, like, that when we talk about people selling, I used to run NameJet for years. And, it was always like, oh, but selling on, domain investor centric platforms is cool. But the end users are literally the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So,
well, it's why do we buy? Why do they buy? What's the point? Like,
yeah.
At the end of the day, it's like, that's just where I start out with. James, you want to hit wealth.com or what else? Hit one more and then hit a name bio, then call it a show.
Are you going to keep it short for the folks today? So, well, hey, before we jump, so we're going to talk about wealth.com in a second, but right before we get to that, let's really quick jump to a commercial. And then we'll be right back here on Off the Market Forever on DomainSherpa, where all roads lead to domains. We'll see you guys in a second.
Oh.
Media Options is the industry's leading domain broker specializing in domain acquisitions, high-value domain sales, and domain name consultation. As pioneers and thought leaders on the subject of the domain aftermarket and domain name value, plus through their clear domain acquisition service, Media Options offers startups and established corporations an unparalleled scope of high-value domain options, providing access to domain names and curation technologies not available elsewhere. Media Options believes in the power of a great domain name and is dedicated to helping you obtain yours. Call or email today to put a domain to work for you.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here on Off the Market Forever with Chris Zuiker, James Iles. We were just talking a little bit about Electra.com, so we're going to keep it moving. I think Wealth.com was the next one we were going to touch on, right? What's the what's the story with that one?
So, just first of all, Wealth.com, what a phenomenal name.
Yeah, right.
If you own that name, that is 8 figures, probably.
Yeah,
Just
that's
an insane name. But yeah, so on the Media Options blog, I did an interview with the co-founder of Wealth. It's a new company that is taking the estate planning industry into another direction by taking things digital, adding in facilities for new assets like NFTs. You can put domain names on there. You can put all sorts of brand new digital assets on there, and some really, really cool tech behind it. But the interesting thing is that they went out and they bought wealth.com about a year before they launched, maybe just over a year before they launched. So
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and look, I think that's it's so cool watching how some of these different sort of legacy areas, are getting disrupted. And a platform like this, where you talk about estate planning, where you can track all of the different assets and all that stuff. I mean, as an attorney who's done a little bit of family law, but not a ton, but I've done a handful of wills and things for, family and friends, and it's a pain in the neck, you know what I mean? Like having to have people catalog all their stuff. I mean, we do the same, with our own, just assets and things. And, it's, and having, unfortunately, on the sad side, I mean, I was the executor for my mom's estate, which when she passed, which, wasn't a lot there to deal with, but it's still a big old process, you know what I mean? And I think that the more that, the better tools that we have, and these are the things that, even when we talk about things like NFTs and, for property transfers, and not even NFTs, but more like the blockchain as a way to, deal with real estate. And when, those, the digital records start to tighten up better and better use of things like blockchain technology and stuff. So, so I love this as a business. And yeah, so I saw that you had the conversation. Did when you spoke to Ray, right? Did he have any insight as to, so they acquired the name and then sat on it for a year? Like what was the deal there? Any insight on that?
So Ray had sold his company. His company was called Emailage before, so a different space. But he sold his company, and it was locked down, and he was looking for a new challenge, and ended up acquiring Wealth.com because of a person that just to develop a project for a personal need, basically, of how to plan his estate. And so from there, he just built out, got the software together, got developers in, got a whole team in to help him out with this, and they just went from there. And they launched not too long ago, and it seems like they're doing really well so far.
Yeah. And, I think one of the comments from the article that stands out to me that I think is, and we've heard this a lot, is that, when he went through his fundraising, that having the domain wealth.com was something that let people know that he was legitimate, and, and he acquired it. He didn't disclose the price, but he said it wasn't cheap. And, but the seller knew the value, and this was the guy, right, who had the means and the idea, and, but it was,
Can we, let's read that quote, because that's a good one. I mean, I think that section where it says this is on the Media Options blog. And JT, I don't know if we can put this in the notes on this.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, so the way this will work too is we'll highlight all the names we talk about. We'll highlight them in the description of the episode, and then we'll have links in there to the articles themselves. So to the extent that anything we talk about is based off of a James article, whether it's on Media Options or otherwise, we'll put the links in the. So go to so for those of you who are listening to this, because more folks actually listen to the episodes than actually watch the episodes. But go to the DomainSherpa.com site and for the particular podcast episode, and you can get links to all of the articles for the domains that we're going to mention, to the extent that there's an article involved. So
I want to hit a couple of things, James, and get your input on this. And I want to read that, JT, because it's the section. What is when the reaction to your wealth.com domain? He said there are people that say that we hired who say, wow, these guys are for real because they already have the domain. I can't believe it, right?
Like literally they say, I can't believe it.
Yeah. It says, for example, for people from Goldman Sachs, the domain itself told them, okay, these guys are real. The domain made a difference, right? So this the self view, like, wow, you can do it. Now, I don't know. Did he give you is there any info about what he sold his past business for, or who he sold it to, or
Yeah,
and just
I was
put it in
hoping you would
spot
ask me that because I can't actually remember. It was Emailage, and it was sold to LexisNexis. Is that how
Okay.
you say it?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the price might be out there, but I'm not sure. I couldn't
Okay,
tell
so
you offhand.
so probably for a pretty sizable amount. So when I look at the different buyer types, there's 5, right? So there's and these are like who buys domains. So there's the hobbyist, the small solo entrepreneur, the national legacy, the viable scalable, and then there's the high rev entrepreneur slash Fortune 500. And so I would classify. And what was the gentleman's name again? Ray.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would classify Ray as that high rev entrepreneur, right? I mean, he bought it,
Yeah.
he ran a business, he sold it, he gets it, right? It seems like he was an email, and so he's got some money to invest in. He's kind of that viable and scalable. And so these 5 buyer types, as you move up, is what you pay, right? So the hobbyist will pay 2,000 to 5,000. It's a GoDaddy, right? They're drinking beer at night. Listen, man, you missed that second beer. They moved on from your domain. You have to have that buy it now price. And you move up to that high rev entrepreneur, they'll spend 350 upwards of $1 million, right? I'm telling you, this domain cost 7 figures.
Yeah.
Pretty confident.
Oh yeah.
I'd
Several.
probably say more, to be honest.
What's that?
I'd go into 8 figures for this name.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I'd agree. I mean, and that's funny,
Well-
because we do this in the domain game. We talk about, buy and sell prices and everybody guesses and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's probably, look, he says in the article that, the price the seller had put on the name, the guy was pretty set. It doesn't sound like there was a lot of negotiation. So my guess is that, whether it's, Drew and other folks in and around the space who've inquired over about wealth.com over the years, people probably know, generally what this was. We probably find that out as well.
I mean, so do I.
That's
how I was shaking my head, JT. It's like,
Oh, okay, yeah.
Listen,
Okay.
most of the domains that James writes on, I've probably 85% of them I've touched. I've not, there's some kind of interaction there. Yeah. But okay, I mean, my and James will be interesting because now I think this is going to help you with your interviews too, right? As we start talking, or you might start changing your questions up because, it's like,
Oh, is Chris, you saying that he's not asking good questions, man? You
no, what I'm saying is that
I'm kidding, man. I'm kidding.
What I'm saying is that maybe you go a little deeper, right? So it's this journey, right? So you had this individual, and that's what I like to talk about with domain names. It's like, it's a journey, right? When you look at this, so often like, they bought this great domain, right? And we focus on that, but not the journey of the entrepreneur, the journey of the business, where were they at? Why did they buy it, right? And why was it important? So in this instance, he bought it pre-launch, right? So he had it. And so, he was able to look legitimate from day one, I'm sure he went in.
And look, Ray, and it's Ray Carvalho, I'm sorry, Ray Carvalho. And and this goes to the point too, as this show continues, we'll start bringing on some of these founders as well. So we'll really be able to hear it from them, which will be really, really insightful and interesting. But this guy's the real deal, man. I mean, like when you read like the rest of the article and you talk about how he invested in a company called Speedbird, which is like a drone business, right? And they were using, Speedbird.aero, AERO, right, as their domain. And, he said like, he invested in it and immediately had them change the name or gave them the name speedbird.com, right? So, so he said, so instead of giving them champagne, because we closed the deal, I gave him the domain name. I mean, this guy is literally the dude. Like, he's like, he gets it and understands it, which is why it's like, and obviously we're rooting for, and I think, it'll be great to see how wealth, kind of how it along in its journey. And I mean, you couldn't have a better sort of kickoff to the, to the story. There's obviously a lot that goes into it, but, as far as like the foundational piece for them kicking off their business, like, it couldn't be better. I mean, I even remember Jason Calacanis talking about investing in, the big Silicon Valley guy who invested. I forget what company he said he invested in, but literally just because they had like the one word premium.com domain name. He was like,
So I think that was Calm.
Calm. It was
mental
Calm.
health app. Yeah.
Yes, it was Calm. See, yeah. And
so that's another one where they got the domain really early on, and it paid dividends for them.
Yeah,
well, to me, it's like, it's that confusion, right? It's like, oh, they got this great domain, but what it is, it encapsulates the belief of a founder in what they're building. Okay.
Yeah.
That's, you know what I'm saying? It's like the domain is there, your premium, right? It shows you're going to own the global positioning. It shows you understand the 7 dimensions, right? Branding, marketing. So the 7 dimensions are global positioning, industry positioning, branding, marketing, SEO, and your ability to scale. And hopefully that's 7. Hopefully that's at 7 there, right? So what it does is it shows that you understand this, right?
Mhm.
And when you get someone in there with this dash and all these other things, it shows that you don't understand the fundamentals of marketing. You don't understand of communication, of trust, right? Of this brand equity. And now there's times you can't own that. But that's what I would say, GT, like just kind of piggybacking on that point is like when a founder comes in there, and it was actually one of his lines in this, when he said, so when I told people that we have wealth.com, people were like, man, this is craziest thing ever, because it gave them a sense of the size of the idea behind the name. It's an amazing branding point.
Yeah, that's that's an
I believe-
awesome like quote, man, because it gave people the sense of the size of the idea. You know what I'm saying? It's like, think about that. Like, you could not have said it any better. I mean, it's when you're talking about a domain like that, like you said, wealth.com is one of those top like 100 names, right? Top 1,000, whatever it might be. I mean, there's a lot of words in the dictionary, but it's as good as it gets. And when, and it really, it gave them a sense of the size of the idea. And it's truly, and I love the idea. I mean, when you look at the platform and you look at the site, I mean, it's one of those things where you're like, how, I'm sure that there's been things, that there are tools and whatnot for this kind of thing, but to make it truly easy to talk about, hey, like, when something happens, like like the idea of the platform for managing the estate, the execution of the estate, like, at the time when you have to do that, because that's another thing, when you're dealing with that situation, it's emotional. It sucks. It's fucking terrible, right? So it's like, and it's a responsibility, and you don't want to get it wrong, and you want to make sure, and it's emotional across the board, and and there's just all these different pieces to it. And if it makes that part easy, gives people peace of mind in the meantime, and then allows for a much easier process when you get to probate for like all that for the estate, I think the idea is a fantastic one, and I think the domain is perfect, and it's like, boom. And I love that. And I love that quote, man. So, it gave them a sense of the size of the idea behind the name. Amazing branding point. And he even says, I believe in domain names. So he's like literally like he's like your perfect, like, it's like we created him in a lab, you know what I'm saying? Like, for spreading the gospel. So, all right, well, I think we got time for probably, you guys want to try and talk about one more, what, I know we want to talk about Firework. Do we want to talk about any others in the meantime, or we want to dive into that one and talk about that for a couple of minutes and then sign off? Chris, what are you thinking?
I'll go to you, James. I do want to hit Rocket Reach on the name bio, right? The second segment to this, but I think this if you have not read this wealth.com interview, go to media options, click the link below and read this article. Okay. Because, especially if you're, if you're a domain investor, like, you're going to understand a little bit more, the thinking that goes behind this, right? The thinking that goes behind this is going to help you when you go to sell your domain. It's going to help you to understand. I did a post this last week on like, don't confuse interest with desire, right? And so often, like, domain investors are like, oh, I've got, they're, like, there's a strong desire, and it's like, no, they're just interested, right? Versus desire. Obviously he had desire behind this wealth.com. I was like, I'm going to build this. It's great, right? But there's some domains out there that you might get, there might be, depending upon the price tag, it's like, listen, they'll never beat strong desire. You're only getting interest, baby,
Well, and that's the thing. And I think it's a key piece to sort of understand too, when you look at the names that you have, certain names, like a name like a wealth.com, it's like a super premium, right? 6-letter.com, one word, huge, potential, right? That's a name. It's like you can pull a Rick Schwartz and hang on to that name until the right buyer comes along. As long as, like, if you want to get $100 million for that name, you might be waiting. It might be your kids or your grandkids that are ultimately going to be the ones that might finally get that payday, if ever, right?
Right.
But you at least know that, hey, holding out for, an 8-figure sale for that domain is not completely out of the question, right? Whereas for a name that might be a 2word.com or something a little bit more obscure or something a little less like, a little bit more targeted, something that might have a negative connotation, you know what I mean? Those are the names.
Wealth.com or something, it's like,
or even something not even like, yeah, exactly. And, deathtax.com or something, like a name like, I'm just trying to think of something negatively connotated in that same sort of sphere. But, it's like, it might be a good name, but it's like you get a, several, tens of thousands of dollar offer on a name that, it's like, if you're holding out for $1 million, you're never going to get it, or it's like the chances of, it's like, if you want to carry the carrying cost forever, fine, they're not that expensive. But it's like, you have to root it in some sort of sense of realism. And, and we try to do that with our clients and help them understand too, like, hey, this is, and a lot of it's also based on timing. If you want to sell something quickly, you're likely going to get less for it than if you're, able to sit on it and be patient for a long, long time. But there's, but then at the same time too, if you just play, and just sit back forever, then you're waiting for someone to come find you, as opposed to being able to actively go out there and, assess the market, figure out who the targets would be, make the proper contact, establish the proper frame, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think like James Bunsky, I mean, like I've always been a fan of James, like in serving his articles. It's like, these are great articles to forward and use in your emails, right? Investor, like, you can use this, when this next segment here, we're going to talk about other domains that aren't as like high, because not everyone has a 1-word domain, right? A 2-word domain, but there's other examples in there as far as why they're important. And so I think some of these videos we do as we get going in this process here off the market, I mean, these are gonna be great videos to forward and say, hey, check this video out. This is why you need it,
Yeah.
But I don't know, James, anything else before we move on to maybe we hit one of those other ones, or we move?
I was just going to say, on wealth.com, just bookmark that interview. So I think that interviews like that are so good, even for lower end domain names. If you're trying to sell a name in the 5-figure range, 4-figure range, I think that hearing from an end user like that is such a valuable resource, and it sometimes works a lot better than if you just write 5 paragraphs worth of content.
I think that's a good point. I mean, these are tools. Look, we do this because we try, we want to educate. I mean, when Drew acquired DomainSherpa from Zuiker, 6 years ago or whatever it was, it's like, the idea was to continue to drive the, education across the space. And, these tools, these episodes and these blogs and the things that we're doing, it's like, like you said, use these to help, make your case. Cause these real world examples are could help, give the proper context to your client, your buyer, whoever you're negotiating with or whatever, when, and for like this one, for example, is to, give people a, to level set around the real, true value of a domain name, and why it matters. And so,
okay. I have to hit 2 more things here, right?
No, hey man, we got as much time as we got, man. It's all good.
Okay. After I fix my mic, you guys hear me? My mic just like the cord dropped out. It's like, I'm the guy talking with nothing. But like, seriously, this is a great article. I just, I mean, we could hit it so many different ways, but right in the beginning, it said, is the domain important when it comes to people trusting your brand? He said, one of the main reasons I wanted the domain is because of the trust factor. But I knew it was just the beginning. There are a bunch of things, so he said trust, right? I mean, one of the main reasons is trust. It brings trust immediately. You hear it. It's like, boom, trust, right? Your domain equals your brand equity. And I've often said, like, there's an 8th dimension to the 7 dimensions, right? This overarching thing, which is trust, trust leads to conversion, it leads to profit, it leads to loyalty, it leads to long-term customers.
Yeah. And
I think
Chris,
especially,
go ahead, James.
I was going to say, especially in estate planning, if you're going to trust all your financial information with a company, are you going to trust deathtax.com? Or wealth.com? Which one are you going to go with?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great point too.
You remember your Dave.com interview, James? Because I put that in my blogs. Like, that's exactly what he said too, right? So he's in financial planning. He said, try Dave, just didn't bring trust, right? Dave.com instilled trust. The second part to this is super important. He said, the other thing, the name about the name is that it's generic enough that we can go in different areas. We can do a bunch of things and we don't need to change the domain name. And that's super important. I give the example of Zen Payroll. Zen Payroll was like, they did payroll, right? And then, as any company, once again, like domains are companies and companies need to scale. If you don't scale, you die. They were scaling and they said, well, they got the point where it's like, hey, we're more than payroll, right? So they came in with their niche, which is great. Boom. But then, that's how most companies get started. They like just niche off something. Then they scaled and they realized, Zen Payroll, it boxes us in. So they rebranded the Gusto, right?
Of course.
And so like, just if you're a company, like do it in the beginning,
Yeah.
Well,
Don't
yeah,
wait,
I
don't-
agree. I mean, I think that, look, to the extent you can afford it, it's almost like, there's certain things where it's like, if you can afford it, get the best that you can possibly afford, right? Because, if you're nickel and diming, plus, I mean, look, we can get, and we don't necessarily have to get into it particularly in this show, but just the amount of marketing value that you get from a killer, .com. I mean, the amount of marketing dollars that you can save by not having to establish like, oh, hey, here's what we are. And like, having to, if the domain helps to tell that story and conveys a lot of the same thing about trust and awareness, it's like, you're saving all sorts of money. And, because I think also when you look at different phases of, the company's life cycle, it's interesting because, a lot of companies will start on the best name they can afford. And then as they become successful, or as their needs change. And I think, so you deal with a couple of different sort of, some of it is timing, right? And funding. I know, James, we were talking about this, and this is one of the things that, on one of the blogs about, how many times you see domain upgrades or domain purchases happen around funding, right? Series A, right prior to, right after, those kinds of things. I mean, one of the examples we were going to talk about, and might as well just dive into it right now, is Firework.com is a company that, raised $150 million and then upgraded from Firework.tv to Firework.com. And this is actually an article that you wrote on Domain Name Wire. So we'll put the link here. Shout out to Andrew Alleman, the other Andrew. But, this one was actually one of ours. We assisted in this deal. We can't disclose any additional info, but, but it is one of those where it was, obviously, super happy to help. And, and I think it's one of those things where this is like a perfect example. They raised money. They knew they needed to, do the upgrade. They were able to make that happen through, the help of us and all that. And, and the folks that funded them, it's badass, right? It's like, now they're literally where they're going to stay. And, and I think part of it is that, this funding round, I think was, helped kind of get them over the hump on being able to cut the check that they needed to in order to be able to do the upgrade. But, and people are going to approach their business at different points in their life cycle with different means. And so, look, you can, get what you can afford. It's like you can't overextend. If you can't afford a, 6, 7, 8-figure domain, then you just can't do it. But, at some point, you almost have to think through, kind of into Chris's point. You also want to be careful not to pigeonhole yourself, not just on extension, but you talk about the Zen Payroll example, and like they, were pigeonholed their business. They had a .com, but then their business sort of model was pigeonholed by their name. And, and it's like, well, if people could figure it out, or they know we do more than payroll, it's like, yeah, but it's all in the name. I mean, and people have short attention spans, and you give people too much credit to think they have access to more information than you realize that they do, or that they're willing to do more research than they're willing to do. And it could be as simple as, well, if they just go on our site and read and go to this page, it's like, you may never even get that level of, so instead, now you're going to be spending marketing dollars to try to educate your customers, probably customers you already have, let alone customers you want to go get, with this idea that you do more than what your name says you do, So, so I think it's an interesting thing. I think when you think strategically around, starting a business, developing a site, developing a business plan, and executing on it, the right name and to give yourself enough runway, and whether it's the
yeah. I mean, I often say, I'm sorry, James, you got anything? 'Cause I'm talking a lot. You want to add anything?
That's all right. I was going to say that Firework.tv was the domain name that Firework started on, and I think that is a perfect example of how it can pigeonhole you with an extension, because branding on Firework.tv just shows immediately, okay, so you're doing something with video. I don't know what you're doing with video, but you're doing something with it. Yeah. And just having Firework.com just allows them the space to branch out into something else. They can pivot, they can do whatever they want to now. And I think that's just owning Firework.com is going to allow them to easily do that without wasting those marketing dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
that's a
they're
good
a
point.
really
Very
interesting
good point.
business, and again, the link to this article will also be, below in the notes of the podcast. So definitely check this out. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. They do like a live, almost like a QVC style, like they call it live commerce, And-
It's
which-
really popular in China. Apparently, it's been going for years in China. This live commerce with celebrities running these, or executives, or whoever else running these events, and it's responsible for billions of dollars of sales.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it's coming over to the US. So just watch out.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
well, one of the data points, well, it's almost like you could argue that it was here. Again, QVC and all this buying, like, live commerce existed on TV, but, hasn't seen, at least in the US, like, hasn't really gone over the hump, into like the internet, right? But it is in China. And like, I think the data point that you mentioned in the article, 2020 Singles Day, live commerce was responsible for $7.5 billion in sales in a fucking 30-minute window, man. You know what I'm saying?
It's insane, isn't it?
And
Insane.
I'm sorry, Chris, I cut you off. You were going to say something.
Oh man, that's good stuff.
You-
No, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously great. It shows, good point, James, like .tv.com, pigeonholing, not for this one, but I'd like to pull up that .xyz. I think you did or someone else did it, but it was like this founder, he rebranded the .com because of email issues and then and conversion issues, and like saw this massive increase. I mean, it wasn't massive, it was like 0.0%, like 1%, but percentage wise it was huge, and it's email conversion. Well, I want to go, maybe we hit that next time, James, because that was a good, if not, we should
I
get
just
it.
sent you the link.
Okay, cool. Yeah. We, there you go.
yeah, we can save that one.
You hit it all, man.
Yeah,
You hit
save it. Let's save it.
This is one. Yeah, this is
Otherwise,
one.
this is going to be about 4 hours long.
Let's
I'm
we got to
here
get
for it
this
every
person
day.
on. We got to get that person on, because that's a good one. But going back to the funding, right? So I mean, most people think, oh, it's because they have money now that they're buying their domain, right? And yes, that's true, but it's also because their worldview probably got shattered in their meeting.
Well,
like,
that's a great point. Yeah, go ahead, because I got a thought on that. But go.
Yeah, I mean, like, so if you think my this process, right, of how we buy, right? It's a worldview, self-view, roadmap, right? So the worldview is I don't need it, it's not important. Now listen, I talk to these founders, I talk to them pre-seed, I talk to them after seed, right? After they get their funding, and it's like, we don't need it, and like, I mean, first of all, if you're a domain investor, you want me to be helping on the acquire domain name, because my first negotiation is always with the end user. Like I have to negotiate with them first, and then I come to you, right? And so I can't tell how many times it's like, you're just wrong. I mean, and Drew does it really well. I remember him talking to like this Fortune 500 company, and they're like, and he was like, actually, it was like they were owned by one of the big like Fortune 20, right? He's like, domains are important. He's like, no, he's like, I hear what you're saying, but you're absolutely wrong. You're incorrect. And it's just like, and that's what happened, right? So that's what happens. Like, when they go into these funding rounds, it's like their worldview is broken by someone that guess what? You're taking money from someone, and you're going to listen to them, right? And these investors, they get it. They've been through it. They understand it's an asset. Maybe they've bought and resold them again. And so their worldview gets shattered. Their self-view gets reinforced. Because like, hey, listen, talk to this company. And so then they're like, okay, we need it. And then they need, from there, they need to get it across the finish line with the roadmap. They need someone like us to help them see the ROI behind it. But that's don't confuse the money, because I talk to companies with money that don't buy their domain. They should buy the domain, right? Yeah. And then the companies. But you're gonna say something, JT?
Yeah, no, well, I was going to make the point you just made, which is, as they're going through these funding rounds, it's like when you have to tell folks that are about to cut a $50 million check, who are some of the savviest, experienced investors, in the world, right? Oh, hey, we operate on a .tv domain name. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
or go dash something, or my, or try. And they're like, hey,
and
listen,
it's like, okay, well, first thing we're
it.
going to do is fix that. And, but yeah, firework.com it's just a neat business model. So definitely check them out just in general, because I think this is super cool. But this also goes back to what you said, Chris. I mean, in interacting with all of these folks, and same for James, who's interviewing these founders, it's like, and this is what I also always loved about, domains and just some of what we do, which is, you do really get the ability to interface with people it's a great equalizer, right? And you get to, from the thousandaires to the billionaires and everybody in between to the individuals and their, we joke
It's like
around.
a rap song right there, man.
Yeah.
Thousandaires to the billionaires. We need to make that into our theme song.
Yeah, exactly. And we have an new intro. Billy did the intro for the show. We got some new, some music. You'll see that when this goes live. So we've got
nice.
that. The each show has its own deal, and we'll be posting this. So we'll be posting it on the DomainSherpa site. We'll also be syndicating it out across like Apple and all the various podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff. And then we'll also post it on YouTube, on the DomainSherpa YouTube channel. So we'll actually start posting there more regularly with a lot of the stuff and the newer episodes and whatnot. We've, it's been a request for a long time coming. And we actually ran into it was actually some of the old theme music caused us to create a little bit of a hiccup on YouTube. So, but we've been putting a lot of the legacy shows up. So, folks, definitely check that out if you haven't seen that. But we will start putting out the newer episodes on a regular basis, which will also be great so that, you can kind of access this a million different ways. And, but yeah, it's the, but the ability to be able to just, interface with these folks, and it is an equalizer also in that, we see it even with our portfolio names. You get these enormous companies or these folks that, or even look at Drew, having acquired names for Elon Musk and, and Zoom and Amazon. And you guys, I know you've worked with some of these folks directly as well. And, in what other scenario does that actually happen, right? It's like, it doesn't, when we've got these digital assets that have this value, and as people recognize that, it's like, it puts you in some pretty interesting conversations and meetings and stuff. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah. I mean, there was one domain we brokered, and, this was $1 billion company, like massive company, right? So I mean, this is all this worldview. Like they started off, give us $100,000 offer. The domain was in the 7 figures. It didn't have a lot of too many companies. Well, I'll save this story for next time.
Okay.
But worldview stuff.
Let's tease it. We're teasing it out for next time. I like it.
JT, to your point, I mean, I know we wanted to hit. I think we're going long here. I was going to hit name bio, but maybe.
Let's do that because we said we're going to do it. So we'll take quick 5-10 minutes tops and just talk through that really fast. But we were going to just call out a specific or an acquisition or purchase or something that you saw that you want to talk about.
Well, I mean, so we wanted. I mean, I think that it'll evolve, but the thought as James and I went into this was like we had his blogs, which go into like the end, actually when we bought a domain, what the domain is. We kind of talk about it. What was, my interpretation and my sales with kind of what happened behind the scenes without knowing what happened behind the scenes, right?
Yep.
And then what they said. And then from there, hit name bio, we hit a couple domain names in a lower range, right? Because some of those domains are in the higher range.
Yeah, of course.
We hit some of the lower range.
Yeah.
We just talk about this evolution of why domain sells, right?
Yeah, sure. So which example? So let's do one from name bio. And which one did you see that you wanted to mention?
So I'll just preface this by, so the first half is kind of end user. This half is kind of the investor to say, hey, well, why did they buy? Where are they at? I mean, we all want the $1 million sale, but they're not always going to be $1 million. And like last year, I took like a couple of days. I pulled all the name bio sales and I went through to look for examples and say, okay, well, this domain was bought for $15,000. Why did they buy it? Who bought it? Right. This domain was bought for $35,000. Why did they buy it? $75,000, $100,000. So I wanted to get a picture like for who's buying this, right? And that's what led me to the 5 buyer types: the hobbyist, the small business / solo entrepreneur, national / legacy, Bible / scalable, and then the high rev. Knowing where your domain falls within this is, knowing, what price to sell it at, right? Knowing when to sell it. Some people are okay waiting for that company, in gambling, saying, hey, that company is a small business. I think they're going to become a national. And so I'm going to hold off until they get to this point, or I'm going to hold off until they get to the Bible scalable, right? As far as the price they're willing to pay. So the one that I saw, which actually hit home, was rocketreach.com. And James, did you see this one on the market anywhere?
No, didn't see it at all. And
yeah,
to be honest, I've heard of Rocket Reach. They're in, what are they in? Like an outreach company.
So I use them whenever I seriously cannot find any other email it's a pretty good tool to use because you can plug in like the LinkedIn address, and then you get the an email back for like what their LinkedIn is, or it gives you other, kind of the other tools. But yeah, it's a lead gen tool, so good for investors.
So I'd kind of assumed that they were already on .com. I've heard of them. I haven't really used them before. And I just assumed that they were on .com because they seem like quite a big company. But yeah, really surprised that they haven't got it already.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, like I always, like whenever I would need to go to them, I would type in the .com, like, they don't own that. Okay, .co, right? So there's massive confusion, on my part, just trying to find them. It looks like they raised money, years ago. It looks like there's no official, I didn't see them on Crunchbase as far as raising money. They've got quite a few employees, 75 employees. So, I mean, they've grown to that larger level. I'd put them in kind of that national / legacy, and which is interesting because they bought it for, at $40,000.
Which is an amazing price, really, like that they could get it for that low, because they've been around such a long time. Sometimes when a company is so well known and you can tell that they're the only end user, sometimes that price can just creep up and creep up and creep up.
Yeah.
And so yeah, $40,000 for the exactmatch.com, even to save you just typing in the wrong domain name every time you use it.
Oh yeah,
just saves that.
Where did they buy it? What platform?
It says GoDaddy.
So they just bought it off of GoDaddy for 40 G's. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We'd have to. I don't know any, the history beyond that. But
well, it's interesting because in that domain, they did. I'm going to actually check out archive.org here. I want to see. That domain, there's really only one buyer, right? I mean, it's rocketreach.co.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, I don't know how it transcends, beyond them. So, I mean, you have one buyer. They probably held it for a while. They probably tried to get it for a while, I imagine,
Yeah.
And, I mean, probably just wore them down. And, actually, let's see here, 2019, there's quite a few snapshots here. So it looks like it was forwarding to something, maybe a parking page or something at one point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, you wonder how much like the prior owner, had really been, reaching out to them to try to sell them the name, and it was just one of those things. And at some point you also have to be careful, depending on when the prior owner acquired it. Because you potentially have some trademark issues. Just quick, sort of quick guidance around that is that, if you've owned a domain prior to the trademark, the company existing or the trademark having been filed, that'll provide you with some coverage in a UDRP. Actually, that'll cover you pretty well in a UDRP. But, if you're registering something after an existing trademark's been registered and is in use, and it's, not super generic, then you're setting yourself up to have that name. Be a UDRP.
Especially if you outbound to them.
Oh yeah, well
that's putting in really hot water.
or if you have it parking and the parking links are like that company, you know what I mean? Like all things you want to avoid. But I think that's also an interesting one. It'll be but they currently just have it pointed to the .co. They don't even have they haven't flipped it yet, and you wonder how much of that's related to backlinks and and other types of things that would create where they don't want to create major disruption because they just bought it, you said, right? You saw it come across
in April. Was it April?
So it's possible they're still trying to figure out.
I mean, to me, I think it's a good sale. Let's see, they brought it, it says April 13th is when they bought it. I mean, I think it's a good sale. I think the 40,000 is a good sale. I think when we look at it, like there's one buyer, right?
I think that's a great acquisition for them.
They had the .co. They were entrenched. I often say that like a lot of companies hard their marketing. Once they hard their marketing, right? I mean, as the main investor, like, oh, they need this, right? But money has to find a place, right? So when you ask for too much money for your domain name, what you do is you force that company. And I say like too much, right? I mean, we have some domains that are like owners like, I want 3 million. And you're like, for 3 million, we can get a really, really good domain, a 2-letter. I like you, but like your domain's maybe worth like 75,000. And so whenever you do that, like you force that company to harden their marketing. And so that I don't know the history here. It looks like it was with GoDaddy for a while. It looks like it was parked. It looks like it had a maybe a for sale page on it at one point. And I would say that, that's probably the case. They launched in the .co, they couldn't get it. I know several founders in this industry, but they're kind of scrappy. They start off, it's like they're just, trying the best they can do. It's pretty cutthroat. There's a lot of companies out there, and I imagine they hardened the market on the .co and then came back to try to get it, realizing that there's a very real ROI case behind owning it, because traffic is going to the .com, so I mean I would peg them kind of in the national, the 75,000 to 150,000, but kind of based on I don't know what they've raised. I
can't see
would say
anything
that's
that
a
they've
good price.
raised.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I can't see anything that they've raised at all.
I saw one article, one where there was someone invested in them. Obviously, it was 75 employees. I mean, and I don't know how many of those are active employees on LinkedIn, but yeah, they have a good team behind them. So there's obviously some revenue behind them. I think it's a good sell. I think it's a good sell. I think it's
Yeah. Well, definitely a good buy, and definitely one of those though where it's like, but it shows you, regardless of path, there's a domain that now is in the hands of its best case end user, and as such, it is
off the market forever.
Off the market forever, baby. All right. Okay. With that, I think, we covered a lot of ground. This was awesome. Can't wait for the next one. Like I said, we'll be running this show monthly. It'll continue to evolve, but this is the general gist with these amazing guys, and a lot more to come. So I want to say, Chris and James, thank you so much, man. Appreciate you guys taking the time to be on here. I know the audience appreciates it. Speaking of the audience, like I say in every single show, thank you to all y'all for tuning in. Without you, there's no us. So as I mentioned, we will post notes and things up on the DomainSherpa.com page. So you can, leave comments. We're also not hard to find in social media, Twitter, and whatnot. So, individually and as a company. So please just, feel free to hit us up. You have any questions or comments, good, bad, ugly, whatever. And otherwise, we just want to say thanks, and we'll catch you all next time off the market forever here on Domain Sherpa, where all roads lead to domains. Peace out.